All right, I'm back. Today is Thursday, March 25th, 2021. Day 2 of this little experiment. Let's see how it goes. We actually got a submission from the audience already, and I think we'll begin with that. But first, how's everybody doing? Who we've got in Twitch, YouTube, and SciTube chats? Also, I wonder how bad the lag is right now. Somebody's horny, somebody's taking a break. Nice. Let's get some emotes in the chat. Oh, you have to capitalize the emotes correctly. Or that's not a universal one. Or no, it is. There we go. There we go. Alright. No, I don't have a voice changer on. This is my voice. I'm flattered, though. Alright. What do we got here? A nice Anon in the chat, the SciTube chat. The Ukraine. There's apparently not going to be a lot of updates from mainstream media on this, so there we go. Oh, somebody's saying that there is lag. If there is, I need to. Yeah, that's a better. This one might help. Anyway. Yeah, so mainstream media not too likely to cover the Ukraine situation much. So the low latency setting. I think I do have that enabled. Yeah, it's low latency on YouTube, and I think it is on Twitch. Yep, low latency. I might just not have a great connection right now. Ah, I see what you mean. Yeah, there is the little gear for those watching on Twitch. The little gear in the player will adjust that for you. Anyway, over here we've got. I don't have this in a browser. I just copied this into a word processor, so I'm going to read from that. It's a short bit. This is on the Ukraine. So I'll give you the context that Anon gave me. Since there will be no MSM stories on the situation in the Ukraine, I have some snippets of the new strategy which you might want to include. So here we go. In the preamble, they already accuse the RF of war crimes. That's Russian Federation, I'm assuming. And on point 4 of the terms, they go full provocative. The objectives of the state policy to ensure the deoccupation of the temporarily occupied territory and its safe reintegration are restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized state border, ensuring the state sovereignty of Ukraine, ensuring national unity, stability and cohesion of Ukrainian society and the state of Ukraine, termination of the use of the temporarily occupied territory for activities that threaten the national security of Ukraine and or are aimed at undermining international security and peace, determination of legal bases of transitional justice, legal bases of transitional transitional justice, formation and implementation of policy in the legal, social, educational, informational, humanitarian, and other spheres to increase and strengthen the level of trust, guarantee the rights and legitimate interests of the citizens of Ukraine affected by the temporary occupation, ensuring sustainable socio-political, humanitarian, and economic development of Ukraine in accordance with certain principles of domestic and foreign policy, the strategic course of the state to gain full membership of the Ukraine in the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Wow. UN and NATO. So that's 8 points. So not only warns the strategy that the Russians should not put tactical nuclear weapons on the Crimea, but because it would also constitute a threat to Ukraine, it then says it will terminate those activities that threaten it, and they say they will implement the strategy in 3 months. So I guess that was like point 7. Point 8 says Ukraine emphasizes the priority of political and diplomatic means for resolving the armed conflict resolved by the Russian Federation, restoring and building peace. Point 9 says Ukraine reserves the right to apply all means of protection of human rights and freedoms, national interest, restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized state border, and ensuring state sovereignty provided by the international law and national legislation. Point 66. Ukraine ensures the creation of conditions for the organization of water supply of the Crimean Peninsula after the liberation of the temporarily occupied territory and the restoration of the constitutional order of Ukraine in this territory. And then in a little meme arrow green text, we've got use of the word liberation. Expected results, and this is point 97. The expected results of the strategy implementation are restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized state border, ensuring the state sovereignty of Ukraine, and building peace and security. And that's the end of the quote. So thanks for that, Screeny. That was some good insight into what's happening in Ukraine. All right. So I think without further ado, I'll get into News Anon's content. Let's check the chat, see if anybody's saying anything. This comedian has gotten more brazen since the Trump call. I'm not familiar with that story. That sounds interesting. If somebody has that, post a link to it. I can read that. All right, so our first story is from Naked Capitalism. Zelensky. Okay. Our first story is from Naked Capitalism. Fearless commentary on finance, economics, politics, and power. Oh, yeah, the Ukrainian... That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's correct. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Yeah, he was... The Ukrainian leader was a comedian who played president on a show. Wow, I can't believe I forgot that. I was not following the situation closely enough to remember that well. Thanks for reminding me. All right. And now we might start World War III. Oh boy. Truly we do live in a world of clowns. All right. From Naked Capitalism. Sick unicorns. America's broken startup system. The pen is mightier than the sword. Sometimes. By Yves Smith. Yves here. In addition to showcasing Hubert Horan's epic... Oh, hold on. Let me zoom in a little bit. You can see. There we go. In addition to showcasing Hubert Horan's epic Uber series, we've also taken a harsh look at venture capital, and most of all the unicorn hype more broadly. For instance, we warned in 2017, fake unicorns. Study finds average 49% valuation overstatement. Over half lose unicorn status when corrected. That's pretty significant. We have to confess to being old enough to remember the .com and then the .bomb era. While that frothy period did produce some durable enterprises, it also featured inanities like... Inanities or insanities? Like Boo.com and the Time Warner AOL deal. And CalPERS really ought to thank us. Remember that the giant pension fund was overeager to launch its private equity new business model, which just private equity new business model sounds promising, which included, I can't even believe this one, late stage venture capital. Not even sure what they want that to mean. As one of its 4 pillars, that meant late stage unicorns. So okay, given CalPERS' need to deploy lots of capital, our continued prodding of the too many internal contradictions, along with CalPERS' eagerness to pile into fads past their sell-by dates, led the initiative to be quietly abandoned. The press today announced its official death. Per the Wall Street Journal, CalPERS steps back from 4-pillar strategy. Well, hey, it looks like some activist journalism changed some things. Interesting. By Jeffrey Funk, and a professor for most of his life, most recently at the National University of Singapore. You can follow him on LinkedIn. A much longer version was just published in American Affairs, originally published at Wolf Street. I guess this is just quoting the Wall Street Journal article, I guess. About 90% of America's unicorn startups, ones privately valued at $1 billion or more, were losing money in 2019 or 2020. According to my recent article in American Affairs, only 6 of 73 were profitable. Only 6 of 73 were profitable in 2019, and 7 of 69 in the first 2 or 3 quarters of 2020, despite most being founded more than 10 years ago. The 6 profitable startups in 2019 included 3 fintech, Green Sky, Opportune, and Square, and one startup each in e-commerce, Etsy, video communications, Zoom, and solar energy installation, Sunrun. So, pretty highly contextual businesses, and like industries, right? For the first few quarters of 2020, 3 of these firms became unprofitable: Opportune, Square, and Sunrun, and 4 others became profitable: 3 e-commerce companies, Peloton, Purple Innovation, and Wayfair, and 1 cloud storage service, Dropbox. Again, all that seems to be pretty contextual. Unicorn startups are even more unprofitable than those that did not achieve unicorn status. That's interesting. According to Jay Ritter, about 20% of startups at IPO time were profitable over the last 4 years, much more than the 10% of unicorn startups in 2019 and 2020. Thus, not only has profitability dramatically dropped over the last 40 years among those startups doing IPOs that went public, down from 80% to 90% in early 1980s. Today's most valuable startups, those valued at $1 billion or more before their IPOs, which is initial public offering, that's when they first go public, are in fact less profitable than startups that did not achieve $1 billion in their IPO valuations. Even worse, a remarkably large fraction of start unicorns have high levels of unprofitability, as shown in the chart below. We got a graph. In 2019, 21 of 73 had losses greater than 50% of revenues, and another 13%, including Uber, Lyft, Pinterest, and Snapchat, had losses greater than 30% of revenues, not counting liquidations. In 2020, 19 of 70 had losses greater than 50% of revenues, and another 11 had losses greater than 30% of revenues. So, looking bad and getting worse. So here's losses as percent of revenues of recent unicorn startups. 2020, the orange line is 70 startups. 2019, the blue line is 73 startups. Yeah, it looks like it's plotting profits. This is an odd graph. Profits are on the x-axis and the number of startups are on the y-axis, and it's a line graph. Anyway, yeah, what it's showing basically is that there's a bunch more that have very low profits than there are that have or no, yeah, it's showing you that there's a bunch that have low loss versus the ones that have, there's like fewer that have high losses. It's just a weird graph. These high annual losses have also translated into large cumulative losses for some startups, much larger than Amazon's peak of $3 billion 20 years ago. Larger than that, Uber has more than $30 billion in cumulative losses. $30 billion in cumulative losses for Uber. And Lyft, Snap, and Palantir have more than $5 billion each in cumulative losses. And these are like, you know, huge big name companies just losing fortunes of money. How many of these startups might become profitable in the near future? One way to address this question is by looking at the changes in profitability during 2020, a year in which some unicorn startups benefited from the lockdown and the higher revenues and willingness to pay that these lockdowns brought. Cloud computing services, food delivery, e-commerce, and internet entertainment benefited from the lockdown, enabling people to work, shop, and amuse themselves while stuck in their homes. Consider the 59 unicorn startups for which full 2020 income results are now available. 26 had higher ratios of income to revenues. 29 had higher ratios of income to revenues. 29 had lower, and 4 about the same. Despite most achieving more than a 30% increase in revenues and some more than 100% in 2020 than in 2019. So total amount of income is a lot higher. Yet, profits are not necessarily. Some are higher, some are lower, some are the same. It's kind of even looking. But the cost, they don't scale well, basically. The costs are mounting just as quickly as the income is. There we go. This simple counting suggests that overall we shouldn't expect a vast change in profitability in the near future, because it's about as profitable the same way. It's just because it's not very profitable in a lot of these cases, when they're making more money, they end up losing more money. Looking in more detail, consider these startups that went from unprofitable in 2019 to profitable in 2020, or that achieved an increase of at least 0.20 in their ratios of income to revenues between the 2 years. These startups are listed on the table below, along with their quarterly income since the fourth quarter of 2019. If a startup is making progress towards profitability, we would expect them to show continuous increases in their ratios of income to revenues, and not just a 1 or 2 quarter improvement during the most severe months of the lockdown, when people were willing to pay almost anything for food, cloud computing, mattresses, exercise bikes, and other products and services. The table below shows that most startups achieved 1 or 2 quarters in increases. 1 or 2 quarters in increases, figures highlighted in red, and not a series of increases that would suggest strong trends toward profitability. Again, highly contextual. Lemonade, Sumo Logic, Cloudera, DoorDash, Dropbox, and Fiverr are the most conspicuous, with big reductions in losses for the second and or third quarters of 2020, but then increases in the fourth quarter. Something better, Peloton and Wayfair show a bigger trend toward profitability, but still declining results from the last 1 or 2 quarters of 2020. A lack of continuous improvement in profitability throughout 2020 suggests that the ratio of losses to revenues for these startups may not improve once the lockdowns are over, and ratios for some startups may even worsen. Highly contextual profits. Gonna ride high for a little while during the pandemic, but then it's gonna be bad once it's over. All right. Let me copy the link to the tweet. If anybody wants to retweet or follow or like or whatever for the tweet. All right, so I'm not going to go through the table in great detail, but this is a table of recent profitability for selected unicorn startups, improvements in red. And we've got reverse chronological order here from fourth quarter 2020 back to fourth quarter 2019. So Zoom, not too much of a difference. It's kind of steady there, but it took off real early second quarter 2020. But recently, it's kind of stabilized. Peloton, income to revenues. Income to revenues. They don't mean expenses or I'm not sure what the difference between income and revenue is in that context. I thought they were the same. So here we go, an improvement for Peloton, apparently. So they want a lower number here then. I think do they mean income to expenses? Because they're talking about losing money. I don't know, revenue is the money that you take in, and income is the money that you take in. It seems like they're saying income versus expenses. So you want a negative number, or a lower, closer to zero number if you're doing poorly. Yeah, so not a whole lot of changes. I still don't get why companies pay for Zoom. It's ridiculous and trash. I mean, they have the easy name to say. They were like a first mover, I guess, when the pandemic hit. Right place, right time, really. That's the case for lots of businesses. It was going to be somebody, and it happened to be Zoom. The best results showing continuous improvements in ratios of income to revenues can be seen for Zoom, Purple Innovation, Snap, Fiverr, and Social Sprout. Zoom is clearly far ahead of the others with rising profits, while Purple Innovation's improvements in profitability are much more modest. The others experienced improvements in profitability, but they still have losses greater than 10% of revenues. So you are talking about losses versus revenue, but you're calling it income versus revenue elsewhere. All right, whatever. Overall, these data suggest that most unicorn startups will struggle to achieve profitability in the future, and thus the small percentage of unicorn startups currently profitable, about 10%, presented at the beginning of the article, will probably not change much in the near future. The percent profitable may rise to 15 or 20%, but not much higher without dramatic changes in technology or scale. The startups that were profitable in 2019 but went unprofitable in 2020, Opportune, Square, and Sunrun, may return to profitability, but some of these who became profitable in the first 2 or 3 quarters of 2020, Peloton, Purple Innovation, Wayfair, or Dropbox, may become unprofitable after the lockdowns end. Those experiencing continuous reductions in ratios of losses to revenues such as Snap and Social Sprout may also achieve profitability in the near future. I don't know. Profit to revenue. It's got to be something like that. Revenue is like the money that you take in. I guess they could be saying income, like income implies, like maybe they mean income is profit, or like revenue after expenses or something like that. But yeah, they want it to be negative or lower. So, I don't know. The point is the same. We know what they're saying. I'm not going to read through all the comments. I think actually there was an article that I wanted to do first. Yeah. For some reason, it got shuffled around. So here's like the big top story from News Anon. North Korea fires 2 missiles into Sea of Japan in second launch this week, reports. Updated 12 hours ago. So there might be some more stuff on this that's not in here. All right. Let's get into it. 2 suspected ballistic missiles were launched from North Korea and into the Sea of Japan, also called the East Sea, Tokyo's defense ministry has reported. It comes after Pyongyang fired 2 short-range missiles over the weekend. North Korea may have fired a ballistic missile, the Japanese Coast Guard said early on Thursday local time, urging ships against coming close to falling objects. They gotta work like an insult to the missile program, don't they? And asking for any information about the suspected rocket. It may have been a ballistic missile. It has not fallen within Japanese territory and is not believed to have come down within Japan's exclusive economic zone. A Japanese defense minister spokesman told reporters. It was later revealed that not 1 but 2 projectiles were fired from North Korea's eastern South Hamgyong province on Thursday morning, South Korean news agency Yonhap reported, citing the military. Seoul did not provide any details on the type of projects launched, noting that the South Korean military has been analyzing the data together with its American counterpart. Our military is keeping a staunch readiness posture under a close South Korea-U.S. coordination with heightened monitoring and security, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said in a statement. This is the second launch from North Korea in the span of 4 days. On Sunday, 2 projectiles were fired from Oncheon and fell into the Yellow Sea between the Korean Peninsula and China. U.S. and South Korean officials said these were short-range cruise missiles. Pyongyang has not yet commented on any of the launches. Last week, DPRK state media cited Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, as warning the U.S. against trying hard to give off powder smell in our land. It's an interesting metaphor. Trying hard to give off powder smell in our land. If it wants to sleep in peace for the coming 4 years, it had better refrain from causing a stink at its first step, she was quoted as saying about the Biden-Harris administration. Similar rhetoric directed at the Trump administration early on turned into a historical detente as the former U.S. president offered Kim a deal. Trump became the first U.S. leader to set foot on North Korean soil during a visit to the demilitarized zone and held 2 summits with Kim in Hanoi and Singapore. However, the talks eventually reached an impasse because the Trump administration refused to lift any sanctions without North Korea's full and irreversible denuclearization. Trump's hardline advisor John Bolton, in particular, reportedly pushed for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons before any U.S. sanctions relief. I mean, what's the worst that could happen if you disarm yourself? I mean, it's not like there's been any kind of precedent for that, right? Even as the government in Pyongyang announced that it would not do any more favors for Trump until it gets something tangible in return, the state news agency KCNA blasted his Democrat rival Biden in a November 2019 editorial calling him a rabid dog. Calling Biden a rabid dog who should be beaten to death with a stick before it's too late. I read that right, didn't I? They blasted Biden, yeah, as a rabid dog who should be put down. Okay. I know there's been precedent. I was being sarcastic. Biden had the temerity to dare slander the dignity of the supreme leadership of the DPRK and is showing signs of the final stage of dementia, KCNA said at the time. The development and testing of ballistic missiles was explicitly condemned by the UN in a series of resolutions condemning North Korea and imposing extensive economic sanctions against Pyongyang beginning in 2006. UN resolutions say nothing about cruise missiles, however. The UN has sought to force North Korea to rejoin the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, from which it withdrew in 2003 after the US government accused it of illegal uranium enrichment. Pyongyang has argued that its weapons program is a defensive measure against the U.S., which has bases in Japan and South Korea. A conflict between the North and South Korea that began in 1950 and eventually drew in China on one side and the U.S.-dominated UN force on the other was frozen by the July 1953 armistice but never officially ended. Well, so nothing changing too much, but there's, continuing tensions and potential escalations. North Korean rhetoric is incomparable. Yeah, that's the rabid dog one, and the smell of gunpowder is pretty good. Oh, we covered this one yesterday. Revealed the UK supported the coup in Bolivia to gain access to its white gold. If you want to see that, the VOD is available on Twitch and also on YouTube. Are the Twitch and SciTube counters separate? I'm not sure how that works, to be honest. I think it may not count me on the SciTube, and somebody might be lurking but not playing the video, so that might be why it's lower. I think that SciTube's added to Twitch, but somebody might not have the player on. They might have paused it or be like AFK or something. AFK is counted if they're just AFK and the video is playing, but if the video is like paused or if they turned off the player or something, then it wouldn't probably count it because it's not embedding. I don't know. Although now I'm seeing a much smaller number on Twitch, 10 versus 14 on SciTube, so maybe they're just not added. I don't know. That's interesting. But yeah, we covered the Bolivia story here yesterday, so it's pretty long. I'm not gonna read through it again, but To sum up, yeah, we got the documents. We have the documents. And as it turns out, yes, the whole thing was a plot to get the lithium for some car batteries. Oh, but speaking of Bolivia, from fair.org by Joe Emersberger, to Western media, prosecuting Bolivian coup leaders is worse than leading a coup. And so that's a picture of Janine Áñez, if you don't know. Behind bars. Cycle of retribution takes Bolivia's ex-president from palace to prison cell, is what the caption says. Interim President Janine Áñez, one of the main figures of the coup. Janine Áñez's government once sought to jail the country's former leader Evo Morales for terrorism and sedition. Now she faces the same charges. The Guardian pretends not to understand the difference between overthrowing a government and arresting someone for overthrowing a government. One can imagine an editor of the London-based Guardian shaking her head sadly as she typed the headline, "Cycle of retribution takes Bolivia's ex-president from palace to prison cell." The subhead told readers, Janine Áñez's government once sought to jail the country's former leader Evo Morales for his terrorism and sedition. Now for terrorism and sedition that he didn't do. Now she faces the same charges, which she did. The Guardian article by Tom Phillips wants us to lament an alleged incapacity of Bolivian governments to stop persecuting opponents once they take office. We are told that Áñez's government did it, and that now the government of President Luis Arce, elected in the landslide win on October 18th, 2020, is also doing it. The article's premise is a lie, and the Liberal Guardian has hardly been to the only outlet spreading it. With help from Jose Miguel Vivanco, America's director of Human Rights Watch, whom Phillips quoted, a team effort between Western media and NGOs like Human Rights Watch often reinforces the view of the U.S. government. Áñez was a U.S.-backed dictator installed after a military coup sent democratically elected President Evo Morales fleeing Bolivia for his life on November 10, 2019. Once in power, Áñez immediately promised security forces legal immunity as they massacred dozens of protesters. She is now charged with terrorism in addition to sedition and criminal conspiracy over her attempt to keep power by terrorizing the public. Her arrest is good news to people who support democracy and human rights. But now, as when the coup took place in 2019, the most obvious conclusions are evaded when they are incompatible with U.S. foreign policy. It should surprise nobody that U.S. officials have made statements depicting her arrest as political persecution. Fighting to spring an ex-dictator. In downgrading the coup that installed Áñez to a mere allegation made against she just allegedly was the interim president. We weren't sure we're not really sure. We have to figure out. Reuters, the Financial Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and Canada's National Post have all run articles quoting Human Rights Watch's Vivanco criticizing her arrest. CNN quoted him, "The arrest warrants against Áñez and her ministers do not contain any evidence that they have committed the crime of terrorism. For this reason, they generate well-founded doubts that it is a process based on political motives." The Washington Post article, whose headline alleged a crackdown on opposition, used a shorter version of the same quote from Vivanco. While all the articles described in the coup as an allegation, CNN stands out for getting the most ridiculous with its denialism. Then head of the Bolivian Armed Forces, Commander Williams Kalaman, asked Morales to step down to restore stability and peace. Morales acquiesced on November 10th for the good of Bolivia, but political allies maintain he was removed from power as part of a coup orchestrated by conservatives, including Áñez. Calling Jeanine Áñez a conservative is very generous. Did Kalaman need to be filmed putting a gun directly to Morales' head for CNN to admit it was a coup? Adding to the disinformation loop from his own platform on Twitter, Vivanco spread an America's Quarterly op-ed by Raul Peñaranda that denounced the arrest of Áñez. Peñaranda once said that Bolivia's democracy was saved the day Morales was overthrown. In his recent op-ed, depicts the November 19 coup as a legal transfer of power. In 2019, the military publicly urged Morales to resign, as both the military and police made clear they would not protect him from violent right-wing protesters, some of whom ransacked his house. Alleged terrorism. Áñez, a right-wing senator whose party received only 4% of the national vote in the 2019 legislative elections, had the presidential sash placed on her by military men, while lawmakers from Evo Morales' party, Movimiento al Socialismo, or MAS, the majority in the legislature, were absent, some in hiding, others refusing to attend without guarantees of their safety and their families. Ignoring all that, the Guardian article from by Tom Phillips, I'm thinking of the Joker movie, by Tom Phillips, refers to claims the former Senator Áñez was involved in plotting the right-wing coup that Bolivia's current government claims brought her to power. My emphasis. Editors are usually big fans of concision. The highlighted words should have been deleted, which would be claims the former senator was involved in plotting the right-wing coup that brought her to power. An added benefit would have been accuracy. Of course, it's easier to deny that Áñez was involved in plotting the coup than to put her in power. That put her in power hardly a stretch, if you do not even accept that a coup took place. Reuters placed scare quotes around the word coup in headlines about Áñez's arrest. Bolivian ex-president Áñez begins 4-month detention over coup allegations. Bolivian ex-president Áñez begins jail term as rights groups slam coup probe. Reuters and CNN also uncritically supported the thoroughly debunked pretext for the coup. CNN reported, though an international audit would later find the results of the 2019 election could not be validated because of serious irregularities, Morales declared herself the winner, prompting massive protests around the country. The international audit is the OAS's widely debunked report. Organization of American States, I believe. Organization of America. Reuters simply stated that the Organization of American States was an official monitor of the 2019 election and had found it fraudulent. Official according to whom? The cycle of dishonesty. The Bolivian government is on a lawless course. This is from the Washington Post. The Bolivian government is on a lawless course. Its democracy must be preserved. This is before the... Oh no, this is after... This is after the golpistas got voted out. This was a few days ago. Oh no. The lawless course that the Washington Post is referring to is prosecuting the people who overthrew the elected Bolivian government and killed people who protested the coup. Washington Post is the one that's owned by Amazon, right? Or is it owned personally by Jeff Bezos? I mean... The coup was incited by transparently dishonest claims repeatedly made by OAS monitors about the presidential election won by Morales on October 20th, 2019. 3 days after the election, they claimed there was a drastic inexplicable and hard to explain increase in Morales' lead in the vote count. The Washington, D.C. based Center for Economic and Policy Research immediately pointed out that this was utter nonsense. But in the crucial months following Morales' ouster, outlets like Reuters constantly shielded the OAS from devastating criticism. Eventually, expert criticism of the OAS continually mounted and disrupted the media silence. Details from the election results in 2020, in which Evo Morales' party triumphed by an even greater margin than in 2019, further exposed OAS's dishonesty. Hey, Quindy. Yeah. They'll call her a civic nationalist next. Yeah. Anyone know if there's been a purge of some kind of the police and military? I haven't heard anything about that. They probably should be doing something to try to avoid another instance like this. All right, cool. Thanks for popping on. Let's see. Like Reuters, the widely quoted Jose Miguel Vivanco of Human Rights Watch spread false claims when it mattered most in 2019. The day after the election won by Morales, Vivanco tweeted that in Spanish that everything indicates that Morales intends to steal the election. As late as December 2019, Human Rights Watch Executive Director Ken Roth was also promoting the OAS claims without the slightest trace of skepticism. Months into the murderous, illegitimate rule of Áñez, Vivanco explicitly referred to Bolivia as a democracy. He did so in a Spanish-language interview with Brujula Digital, an outlet edited by Raul Peñaranda, the coup supporter whose America's Quarterly op-ed Vivanco recently promoted on Twitter. Meanwhile, on Twitter, again, Twitter is news. I don't like that. Meanwhile, on Twitter, Vivanco constantly refers to the governments of President Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela and President Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, two democratically elected presidents the U.S. government once overthrown, as dictaduras, or dictatorships. The New York Times editorial board openly supported the coup that ousted Morales in 2019. The forced ouster of an elected leader is by definition a setback to democracy, and so a moment of risk. But when a leader resorts to brazenly abusing the power and institutions put in his care by the electorate, as President Evo Morales did in Bolivia, it is he who sheds his legitimacy, and forcing him out often becomes the only remaining solution, the only remaining option. That is what the Bolivians have done, and what remains is to hope that Mr. Morales goes peacefully into exile in Mexico and to help Bolivia restore its wounded democracy. What indicates his intent is enfranchising indigenous people. And yeah, I believe Morales was the first indigenous head of state elected in Latin America after colonization. Don't quote me on that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, not liking the people having power instead of, the companies that are using these countries as resource colonies. So predictably enough, a Times article about the recent Áñez arrest referred vaguely to the utterly debunked OAS fraud claims, a contested vote count, and took the same kind of dishonest stance as Human Rights Watch and other Western media by equating a US-backed dictatorship to a democratically elected government whose ouster the US supported. Both Mr. Morales and Ms. Áñez used the judiciary to go after their critics. Their critics. That's... Alright, and yeah, now I'm seeing 7 Twitch viewers, but there's 15 people in the side tube. I'm thinking it doesn't add those numbers to Twitch. Libs still coping when indigenous people vote. Absolutely. The thing about living in a country is that you want the country to be okay to live in for the people who live there. They want the people voting to be the people who are not from the country, not native to it, don't live there, who are just using it to extract resources. Those are the only people allowed to vote in the minds of liberals. The Washington Post editorial board came out with a wild defense of Anya's, headlined, "The Bolivian government is on a lawless course. Its democracy must be preserved." Most ominously, the editorial said, the Biden administration should lead a regional effort to preserve democratic stability in this long-suffering country, lest crisis turn into a catastrophe. Informed people may laugh at this for a few seconds until they remember that Bolivia's people could eventually face lethal U.S. sanctions for daring to hold murderers to account. Left unchallenged, that's the catastrophe that propaganda like this could bring about. Brutal dictators supported by Washington have no reason to doubt that establishment journalists and big NGOs will try very hard to keep them out of jail. Removing the threat of U.S.-backed coups from the world will involve a constant struggle against Western media and the sources they present to us as reliable. Yeah. Libs still coping when indigenous people vote. No, you can't vote for class-based stuff. You must vote for our idpolarinos. 22 people watching. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure if that's accurate. How is living in a country cringe? Explain that to me. Explain, Screeny. You're not making sense. Alright, from Reuters, exclusive. Tencent boss meets China antitrust officials as scrutiny widens. Oh, I have to... Reuters. Pony Ma, the founder of Tencent Holdings, China's biggest social media and video games company, met with antitrust watchdog officials this month to discuss compliance at his group. 3 people with direct knowledge of the matter said. I can't zoom in. The meeting is the most concrete indication yet that China's unprecedented antitrust crackdown, which started late last year with billionaire Jack Ma's Alibaba business empire, could soon target other internet behemoths. Beijing has vowed to strengthen oversight of its big tech firms, which rank among the world's largest and most valuable, citing concerns that they have built market power that stifles competition, misused consumer data, and violated consumer rights. Tencent, whose WeChat messaging and payment mobile app is ubiquitous in China, is expected to be the next in line for sharper antitrust regulatory inquiries, said the 3 people. Interesting how if you've got a certain kind of government, sometimes things happen where you actually look out for things like trusts and monopolies and try to deal with it. Wonder if there's a correlation there. News of the meeting, which has not been previously reported, came ahead of Tencent's December quarter results on Wednesday, in which the company reported a forecast-beating 175% rise in quarterly profit, helped by a surge in gaming revenues. Speaking to reporters following the earnings announcement, Ma said the company was working actively with regulators on the compliance, including combing through some of its previous investments. He did not refer to the meeting. Tencent President Martin Lau said the company's interaction with the antitrust watchdog was part of the normal course of business. We, Tencent, conduct meetings with regulators on a regular basis, and this is one of the regular meetings that we have. Just some regular situations with some regular people doing regular things. Did you guys hear about Amazon forcing drivers to get face scans? Yeah, I talked about that yesterday. That was a hell of an article. During the meeting, we had a discussion about a broad range of topics. The main focus was actually on creating a healthy environment for innovation. Ma, who seldom gives media interviews and had been out of the public eye for more than a year, was in Beijing this month for China's annual parliamentary meeting and visited the State Administration of Market Regulation, SAMR, office the week before last, said the people. Which people? The Tencent founder ranked this month as China's second richest person with $74 billion fortune, is a parliamentary delegate with Guangdong province, where the company is headquartered. So founder, second richest person, and a parliamentary delegate? This took a different turn. That doesn't sound so good. And this is Ponima Huateng, it says. Yeah, that's this guy. Tencent requested the meeting with SAMR deputy head Gan Lin and other senior officials and the three people. Oh, so it's like these mystery people. Tencent and SAMR did not respond to Reuters' request for comment. At the meeting, the two parties discussed how Tencent could better comply with antitrust rules, the two of the people say. Wu Zhengguo, the head of SAMR's Anti-Monopoly Bureau, who was also at the meeting, expressed concern about some of Tencent's business practices and asked the group to comply with antitrust rules, one of them said. SAMR is currently gathering information and looking into monopolistic practices by WeChat and whether the super app has squashed fair competition and squeezed smaller rivals, two of the people said. All the sources declined to be named due to the sensitivity of the matter. Tencent shares dropped as much as 1.7% in a weaker Hong Kong market to touch today's lowest level after the Reuters report. The stock ended down 0.8%. Corrective action. The meeting between Ma, who is also Tencent's chairman and chief executive, and the antitrust officials came a few days after he called for tighter governance and the internet economy at China's parliamentary meeting in Beijing. Ma's discreet public profile is in sharp contrast to that of unrelated fellow entrepreneur Jack Ma of Alibaba, whose public criticism of China's regulators triggered a chain of events that resulted in the last-minute halting of fintech affiliate Ant Group's $37 billion IPO last November. Isn't it nuts how something like that just has like massive economic consequences? You know, you have just a handful of people in charge of these big companies, and like little personal things like that can have these big economic consequences that affect a huge number of other people who have nothing to do with it. One of the people said that Tencent had not been officially notified by SAMR of any investigation into its activities, but it's expecting to hear from the regulator soon. As one of China's big two, it's perfectly normal that Tencent felt anxiety about being targeted, said Yunting, a lawyer with Shanghai-based Debun law offices, referring to Ma's meeting with the regulatory officials. There are two worries for Tencent. A concentration of undertakings review could impact acquisition deals, while investigations and litigations on abuse of dominant market positions could hurt the advantage of its platforms. To cushion the impact of any potential moves against it, Tencent has been scrambling to take corrective action. Tencent is having to offer concessions in a plan to merge the country's top two video game live streaming sites in order to resolve antitrust concerns, Reuters reported on Tuesday. Crazy how video game streaming is such a big economic thing. In a separate deal, the firm, which held a 5% stake in local gaming firm Zhejiang Century Huatong Group, had also planned to buy another 10%, said one of the people, and another person with direct knowledge, making it the largest shareholder. Earlier this month, however, Tencent acquired 5% of Century Huatong and became the second largest shareholder instead, looking to avoid potentially lengthy and complicated antitrust approval process, the two people said. Well, it sounds like some backroom deals going on there. Trying to keep everything running, I guess. It's all very mysterious. These guys are literally in the party, and the state is investigating harder than the US ever has. Oh yeah, for sure. You've got a nice voice. Now use an anime girl VTuber avatar. What you don't realize is that I'm already a VTuber. This is a very sophisticated animated avatar, which is only has a face covering for aesthetic purposes. There's no privacy concern here. I'm already hidden behind a virtual person. Yeah, right. In the West, you just have Microsoft, Amazon, and all those dominating everything. So there isn't any oversight at all. China's certainly doing better than the West in that respect, 100%. We must tap into the VTuber market. I mean, hey, if y'all don't want to show your face, but you want to put stuff out there, I'm pretty sure there's free VTuber software. Millionaires and billionaires are allotted a certain amount of seats. Is that true? And is that socialism at its most advanced? Well, Caleb Maupin agrees that billionaires are socialism, copium dealer. Those companies were started by the state too. Well, how did you get people who were billionaires if they're state or enterprises? Surely they would have been able to set it up so that none of them became billionaires. Kind of odd that they did. But anyway, that's a whole history lesson right there to unpack. Underratedly, there's got to be total chaos behind closed doors in the CPC. Oh yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of internal politicking going on there, which is a shame. Like, it would be awesome if they had everything, all their stuff together, and there was nothing. I wish there was nothing to criticize about China. That'd be awesome. Hell, I wish there was nothing to criticize about everywhere. All right, next story. People downwind of atomic blasts. Renew push for U.S. payout. This July 16th, 1945 file photo shows the mushroom cloud of the first atomic explosion at Trinity Test Site near Alamogordo, New Mexico. President of the Navajo Nation and New Mexico residents who live downwind from the site of the world's first atomic blast are among those seeking recognition and compensation from the U.S. government for people affected by uranium mining and nuclear testing carried out during the Cold War. A congressional subcommittee was taking testimony Wednesday, March 24th, 2021, about who should be eligible under the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. War. What it isn't good for. Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the desert northeast of, and this is Associated Press, in the desert northeast of Las Vegas, residents living along the Nevada-Arizona border would gather on their front porches for bomb parties or ride horses into the fields to watch as the U.S. government conducted atomic tests during a Cold War era race to build up the nation's nuclear arsenal. About 100 of those tests were above ground, and U.S. Representative Greg Stanton of Arizona testified during a congressional subcommittee hearing Wednesday that residents at the time marveled at the massive orange mushroom clouds billowing in the distance. They had no idea. They were never told that they were being exposed to dangerous cancer-causing radiation, Stanton said. As a direct result of the radiation exposure from these tests, thousands of Arizonans had suffered from cancer. Entire families had suffered from cancer, and far too many have died. He and others testified as part of a renewed push for compensation from the U.S. government following uranium mining and nuclear testing carried out during the Cold War. Lawmakers from several western states, advocacy groups, and residents have been urging Congress to expand a payout program for years, and advocates say the latest push takes on added weight because the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is set to expire next year. Wednesday's hearing was the first on the issue since 2018, advocates said. In New Mexico, about 40,000 people lived within a 50-mile, 80-kilometer radius of a military range where the world's first atomic bomb was detonated as part of World War II's top-secret Manhattan Project, said Tina Cordova, co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. The advocacy group has been trying for years to bring awareness to the lingering effects of nuclear fallout surrounding the Trinity site. She told the committee that the bomb, being the first, was inefficient and sent a fireball of plutonium into the atmosphere. For days, radioactive ash fell from the sky and settled on everything: the soil, in the water, in the air, on the plants, and on the skin of every living thing. It was a public health disaster of grand proportions, Cordova testified. I wonder what happens if you just blow up a huge bomb made of radiation. I'm sure there won't be any problem with it. Nah. By the way, the nuclear scientists involved in this project at the time weren't even entirely sure that detonating a nuke wasn't going to ignite the atmosphere. There was like reasonable suspicion that there could be a chain reaction with, or was it hydrogen bombs? Anyway, they're really reckless with this kind of stuff. Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez testified about the environmental and health effects of decades of uranium mining on tribal land. He said more than 30 million tons of ore were extracted from Navajo lands to support U.S. nuclear activities, with many Navajos working in the mines without knowledge of the dangers. He also pointed to a massive spill in 1979 that spewed radioactive tailings and wastewater onto tribal lands in the Church Rock area in western New Mexico. A multi-billion-dollar defense spending package approved last year included an apology to New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and other states affected by radiation from nuclear testing over the decades, but no action was taken on legislation that sought to change and broaden the compensation program. U.S. Senator Ben Ray Lujan of New Mexico, who sponsored the bill to expand the program when he was in the House, recalled how Navajo women previously asked lawmakers whether they were waiting for the people who were exposed to radiation to die so the problem would go away. It's just not right, Lujan said, pointing to those on the Navajo Nation as well as people downwind in New Mexico, Idaho, Colorado, Montana, Nevada, Utah, and Guam, who are not eligible for payouts. Guam has to be Pacific testing, right? But like Idaho and Montana, that stuff has like incredible reach. Night Screeny. Pilger's documentary about China has a whole thing on Guam. That sounds pretty cool. If it's available, we might be able to stream it on the SciTube at some point. These people deserve justice. The compensation program covers workers who became sick as a result of the radiation hazards of their jobs, and some of those who live downwind of the Nevada test site, where the federal government conducted several hundred nuclear explosive tests over 4 decades. Excluded are residents near the Trinity site in New Mexico, others who were downwind in Nevada and Arizona, miners who worked in the industry after 1971, veterans who cleaned up radioactive waste in the Marshall Islands, and others. The program has paid out nearly $2.5 billion on more than 37,000 claims since 1990. If Congress doesn't renew the program, no more claims can be filed after July 2022. Congressional analysts and others could not answer the committee's questions about the potential number of new claims that could be filed if eligibility were expanded. U.S. Representative Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia, said payouts so far amounted to a pittance when compared to the $500 million the country expects to spend on maintaining its nuclear arsenal for the next decade. They really don't like paying for stuff that they're responsible for. All right, I'm going to save that documentary link. Thank you. Boom, boom, chow. There are about 180 billionaires in China's Congress of 5,200 people. I'm going to guess that's overrepresented. It's really fucked up how the U.S. used the natives as testing. Oh, yeah. Like, not even informing people what was going to be happening. Just being like, we'll set some bombs off and we'll see what happens, I guess. A whole lots of those areas will just be uninhabitable for a while. And then there's all the problems of like having to move people out of danger, getting sick, dying. All right, from Common Dreams. Fending off antitrust push, tech giants now biggest spenders on DC lobbying. Depopulating, yeah, that is genocide. Forcible removal. Although, to be fair, in the context, it probably is better to be relocated than to be continually exposed to radiation poisoning. But then again, on the other hand, who caused the problem in the first place? So it's kind of like, you know, trying to find a loophole to turn your genocide into a humanitarian action. That's enough to make anybody go Joker. Bikini Atoll had like 6,000 people. I don't remember the numbers, but yeah, there was a bunch. Yeah, the whole thing is horrible. And again, this is just stuff that we know about. Who knows what kind of secret testing and whatnot they might have been doing that we don't know about today. Fending off antitrust push, tech giants now biggest spenders on DC lobbying. It's more important than ever for lawmakers to show their independence and bring these companies to heel. By Jake Johnson, staff writer. With Facebook and Amazon leading the charge, big tech has surpassed big oil and big tobacco to become the largest lobbying spender in the U.S. as the increasingly powerful and consolidated industry attempts to use its wealth to fend off growing support for antitrust action among lawmakers and the American public. We need to rein in big tech's influence in Washington now so that lawmakers and regulators can break them up, enact comprehensive privacy legislation, and hold these companies accountable for harming our economy and our democracy. Jane Chung, Public Citizen. According to a new report released Wednesday by consumer advocacy group Public Citizen, Facebook and Amazon spent more money on federal lobbying than any other U.S. corporations during the 2020 election cycle, with Comcast not far behind in third place. Using campaign finance data from the Center for Responsive Politics, the report shows that big tech companies have donated to 94% of members of Congress who serve on House and Senate committees with jurisdiction over the industry. Notably, contributions are not skewed too heavily to one side of the aisle. Public Citizen notes Democrats, in sum, received $1.7 million in 2020, while Republicans received $1.4 million. Overall, the group found tech giants spent $124 million on lobbying and campaign contributions during the 2020 cycle, shattering its previous spending records. Amazon and Facebook drove most of this growth. Public Citizen points out, with Amazon ramping up spending by 30% and Facebook by 56%. The two companies spent nearly twice as much as Exxon and Philip Morris on lobbying during the 2020 campaign, the analysis finds. That's a big change. In this moment of enhanced security, tech companies are going to spend millions and dial through their Rolodexes. Look, do they still have Rolodexes? Dial through their Rolodexes looking for officials to stop regulation and legislation needed to protect consumers, said Lisa Gilbert, Public Citizen's executive vice president. This is simply unacceptable. Here's a graph. PAC contributions are dark green, mint green is lobbyist contributions. House Judiciary Committee, House Energy and Commerce Committee, Senate Judiciary Committee, Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Technology. Yeah, so we're looking at millions of dollars. $3.2 million. It's a lot of bribes. In addition to significantly increasing their spending, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Apple also added dozens of lobbyists to their teams of influence peddlers in Washington, D.C., according to Public Citizen. The four big tech companies recruited more lobbyists into their army, increasing its ranks by 40 new lobbyists from 293 in 2018 to 333 in 2020, the report notes. Big tech's lobbyists are not just numerous, they're also among the most influential in Washington. Among the 10 lobbyists who were the biggest contributors of the 2020 election cycle, half lobby on behalf of at least one of the four big tech companies. So they're like freelancing too. They're not only are they politicians, you know, selling politics to the highest bidder, so are the lobbyists who act as the intermediaries. But I mean, that's not surprising. Just kind of funny. Public Citizen. Breaking, big tech lobbying now exceeds all other industries, including oil and tobacco. Facebook and Amazon are now the two biggest corporate lobbying spenders in the country. Big tech's power has reached truly unprecedented levels. Big tech's growing lobbying operation in the nation's capital is reaching its zenith as industry titans Facebook and Google are attempting to quash antitrust laws led by the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and state attorneys general. On top of the ongoing legal challenges to tech giants' market dominance, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers expressed support last month for legislative action, including potentially breaking up huge companies to curtail the power of corporations like Facebook, Google, and Amazon, leaving antitrust advocates hopeful that meaningful change could be on the horizon. We need to rein in big tech's influence in Washington now so that lawmakers and regulators can break them up, enact comprehensive privacy legislation, and hold these companies accountable for harming our economy and our democracy, Jane Chung, big tech accountability advocate for Public Citizen, said in a statement Wednesday. The Federal Trade Commission, the Justice Department, and the state attorneys general are signaling that justice is finally on its way, said Chung. But with big tech political expenditures at historic levels, it's more important than ever for lawmakers to show their independence and bring these companies to heel. And that's the end of this article. Yeah, I don't think anything's going to happen with this. Too much lobbying power for anything to get done. And all this stuff about, breaking them up and all that. Probably not the best idea anyway. I mean, these things work better because of scale. If you really want to have a proper way to deal with this, you got to collectivize them, nationalize it or something, put it in the hands of, if not the federal government, the local or state governments or something like that, Of course, that's even a bigger ask. Nothing's going to happen with that unless something significantly changes with the context. with the larger political context. So why it's so critical to unionize Amazon specifically? Yep. And also why it's very important for unionization to get pushed as a broader movement. Yeah, it needs to be coming from the people. It needs to be coming from labor pressuring the system. All right. From AP, judge rejects ex-CIA workers try to dismiss hacking charges, by Larry Neumeister. Does it label? Got a label on this picture? Nope. New York AP. A former CIA employee cannot get espionage charges against him dismissed on the grounds that there weren't enough Hispanic or black individuals on the grand jury that indicted him, a judge ruled Wednesday. What? A former CIA employee cannot get espionage charges against him dismissed on the ground. Oh, the CIA employee was saying that the charges should be dismissed because the grand jury wasn't diverse enough. That was supposed to be the grounds for dismissal that the CIA agent was asking for. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. U.S. District Judge Paul A. Crotty issued his ruling in the case against Joshua Schultz, finding that there was nothing illegal about a suburban grand jury in White Plains returning the indictment during the coronavirus pandemic rather than a grand jury in Manhattan that normally would have done so. Schultz faces an October trial on charges that he leaked a massive trove of CIA hacking tools to WikiLeaks. Schultz, 32, has pleaded not guilty to all charges. So he's indicted on leaking, on being a whistleblower. Schultz's lawyers had argued that 9 criminal charges alleging that Schultz leaked national defense information to WikiLeaks should be dismissed because the grand jury did not reflect a fair cross-section of the black and Hispanic populations in the community. Crotty, though, said the reliance on a White Plains grand jury rather than a one seated in Manhattan was necessitated by an external force, the pandemic, rather than an effort to exclude certain segments of the population from being impaneled. He called the decision by prosecutors to seek an indictment in White Plains entirely proper. A lawyer for Schultz did not immediately comment. Prosecutors say the 2017 release of secrets by WikiLeaks resulted from the largest leak of classified information in CIA history. Schultz worked as a coder at the... So it's Schultz, they just misspelled it. Schultz here. Yeah, Schultz worked as a coder at the agency's headquarters in Langley, Virginia, where some of the CIA's digital sleuths designed computer code to spy on foreign adversaries. A jury last year deadlocked on espionage charges, though it convicted Schultz of less serious charges of contempt of court and making false statements. Prosecutors sought a retrial. Wednesday's ruling may foreshadow the outcome of a similar request to toss out charges in the case against Ghislaine Maxwell. The ex-girlfriend of what's that got to do with this? The ex-girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein charged with procuring teenage girls in the 1990s for him to sexually abuse. Lawyers for Maxwell, who has pleaded not guilty in a case presided over by a different judge, argued in pretrial motions earlier this year that the White Plains grand jury that returned an indictment against her after her July arrest did not include enough Hispanic and black grand jurors. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got a whistleblower being prosecuted and trying to see if it'll stick, to claim that the jury wasn't representative or diverse enough. And we've also got a human trafficker doing the same thing. Maxwell 59 faces a July trial. So that's going to be a big story too. Yeah, I don't see that working out. Ghislaine is black. No, she's back. Yeah. This is just a weird story. I guess they figured that they'd have a judge that was sympathetic to that argument. Maxwell gonna get COVID? I mean, COVID is so unpredictable that would be a great way to try to, like, tie up loose ends. I would think that, I mean, honestly, shocked she hasn't yet. The COVID BS is used by everyone to avoid jail at the moment. I can't read whatever that is. It's the standard lawyer tactic right now. Yeah, it makes sense. I'm not gonna lie, if I were to go to jail, or anyone go to jail, or anyone would, I think there was the second part to that statement. It's fair prisons are dangerous, but yeah, I mean, yeah, like, prisons are, much more prone to spreading coronavirus, I would think, given how tightly packed people are. Confined rooms all the time. Let's see. Biden administration urges Supreme Court to let cops enter homes. Oh boy. Oh boy. This is a fun one. Oh. Yeah, and unsanitary prison conditions and all that. Legal tactics are legal tactics, so it's contingent on the context. Yep. It is. There was prison protests, etc. at the beginning of COVID, and a lot of people all over the world in low security prisons escaped. Yeah. All right. So here's a great story from the Department of I Told You So. Biden and this is from Forbes. Biden administration urges Supreme Court to let cops enter homes and seize guns without a warrant. Nick Sabilla, senior contributor, policy. The U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday will hear oral argument in Canaglia versus Strom, a case that could have sweeping consequences for policing, due process, and mental health, with the Biden administration and attorneys general from 9 states urging the High Court to uphold warrantless gun confiscation. But what would ultimately become a major Fourth Amendment case began with an elderly couple's spat over a coffee mug. Oh, hey, the viewers suddenly jumped up. I don't know if I trust this headline. Yeah, well, I mean, it's Forbes, but the thing with guns is that, like, they want to have it be a perpetual issue that they can milk for political drama, to get people to go vote, either to vote to preserve gun rights or to vote to try to take the guns away and make everything safer. That's like the main purpose of the argument. They're also at the same time just routinely doing seizure of firearms through civil and criminal asset forfeiture. So it's kind of like this kind of stuff is definitely, salacious, and the kind of thing that the whole issue is that it exists for the purpose of creating. But like, yeah, the real problem with this kind of stuff is that people are just having stuff stolen from them all the time. And it's not just guns, but guns are a big part of it. Writer doesn't often choose headline, to be fair. Writer never chooses headline in a place like Forbes. That shit is dictated by SEO exclusively. Search engine optimization, I'm assuming you mean. Yeah. Well, they got to get them clicks. But we'll see what the article actually says. We'll see how accurate this headline is. In August 2015, 68-year-old Edward Caniglia joked to Kim, his wife of 22 years, that he didn't use a certain coffee mug after his brother-in-law had used it because he might catch a case of dishonesty. That quip quickly spiraled into an hour-long argument. Growing exhausted from the bickering, Edward stormed into his bedroom, grabbed an unloaded handgun, and put it on the kitchen table in front of his wife. With a flair for the dramatic, he then asked, "Why don't you just shoot me and get me out of my misery?" Perhaps unsurprisingly, the tactic backfired and the two continued to argue. Eventually, Edward took a drive to cool off, but when he returned, their argument flared up once again. This time, Kim decided to leave the house and spend the night at a motel. The next day, Kim phoned home. No answer. Worried, he called the police in Cranston, Rhode Island, and asked them to perform a well check on her husband and to escort her home. When they arrived, officials spoke with Edward on the back deck. According to an incident report, he seemed normal and was calm for the most part, and even said he would never commit suicide. People who, I mean, I'm assuming they asked, but the way that they said that, it sounds like he volunteered the information. However, none of the officers had asked Edward any questions about the factors relating to his risk of suicide, risk of violence, or prior misuse of firearms. Edward had no criminal record and no history of violence or self-harm. In fact, one of the officers later admitted he did not consult any specific psychological or psychiatric criteria or medical professionals for his decisions at that day. Still, police were convinced that Edward could hurt himself and insisted he head to a local hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. After refusing and insisting that his mental health wasn't their business, Edward agreed only after police falsely promised that they wouldn't seize his guns while he was gone. So that's where the story gets like... So like they kind of had to be convinced to try to take measures to deal with this guy's mental health situation. But like as soon as he's out of there, all right, let's grab those guns. Wow. Yeah. Compounding the dishonesty, police then told Kim that Edward had consented to the confiscation. Believing the seizures were approved by her husband, Kim led the officers to the two handguns the couple owned, which were promptly seized. Even though Edward was immediately discharged from the hospital, police only returned the firearms after he filed a civil rights lawsuit against them. Critically, when police seized the guns, they didn't claim it was an emergency or to prevent imminent danger. Instead, the officers argued their actions were a form of community caretaking. Community caretaking. A narrow exception to the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement. First created by the Supreme Court nearly 50 years ago, the community caretaking exception was designed for cases involving impounded cars and highway safety on the grounds that police are often called to car accidents to remove nuisances like inoperable vehicles on public roads. Both a district and appellate court upheld the seizures as reasonable under the community caretaking exception. Really? In deciding Caniglia's case, the First Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals acknowledged that the doctrine's reach outside of the motor vehicle context is ill-defined. Nevertheless, the court decided to extend that doctrine to cover private homes, ruling that the officers did not exceed the proper province of their community caretaking responsibilities. And that includes, like, lying about having the consent to seize property. Like, what? Like, I don't know how you look at a case like this and it's like, oh yeah, they needed to lie about, like, somebody willingly surrendering this. And then it's like, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Cops reasonably should have the ability to lie to people about the consent of seizing property. Like, think about the kind of state of mind that you have to be in for that to be, like, reasonable. I mean, it's a whole other question about, like, the safety of the situation and all that. That's like, that's another question, but this procedure thing is just weird. That people are okay with this. Like, not even being like, maybe we should have done things differently. Of course, I'm not looking at the court documents. This is a summary. Siding with law enforcement, the First Circuit noted that a police officer must act as a master of all emergencies who is expected, maybe they shouldn't, who is expected to provide an infinite variety of services to preserve and protect community safety. Maybe they shouldn't be, you know. By letting police operate without a warrant, the community caretaking exception is designed to give police elbow room to take appropriate action, the court added. In their opening brief for the Supreme Court, attorneys for Caniglia warned that extending the community caretaking exception to homes would be anathema to the Fourth Amendment because it would grant police a blank check to intrude upon the home. Yeah, you know, it's the whole. I mean, this is what they're going to do. This is what's going to replace the whole thing where it's like, smells like somebody smoking marijuana in here, right? They're going to be able to say that if they think that somebody's in danger, that there's some kind of community interest they have to look after. So they got to knock those doors down, shoot a dog, and, you know, break people's arms. And surrender all of your stuff. That fear is not unwarranted. In jurisdictions that have extended the community caretaking exception to homes, everything from loud music to leaky pipes have been used to justify warrantless invasion of the home. A joint amicus brief by the ACLU, the Cato Institute, and the American Conservative Union revealed. That's a hell of a partnership. The ACLU, the Cato Institute, and the American Conservative Union. This expansion could also have perverse effects and disincentivize people from calling for help. You think? Oh yeah, the cops are just going to steal your shit because you need help. As that brief noted, when every interaction with police or request for help can become an invitation for police to invade the home, the willingness of individuals to seek assistance when it is most needed will suffer. But in its first amicus brief before the High Court, the Biden administration glossed over these concerns and called on the justices to uphold the First Circuit Court's ruling, noting the ultimate touchstone of the Fourth Amendment is reasonableness. The Justice Department argued that warrants should not be presumptively required when a government official's action is objectively grounded in a non-investigatory public interest such as health or safety. And of course, the political climate leads people to say that guns are just dangerous, so it's a matter of public health and safety to confiscate them. If you got a gun in your house, it's reasonable for a cop to just bust in and take the gun, along with maybe some other things too. Question for you all. What does an authentic community response to a mental health crisis look like in your mind? Well, I would say start with bring in a social worker, not a cop. But I'm not going to get deep into that right now. The ultimate question in this case is therefore not whether the respondent officer's actions fit within some narrow warrant exception, their brief stated, but instead whether those actions were reasonable, actions the Justice Department felt were justified in Caniglia's case. As a failsafe, the Justice Department also urged the Supreme Court to uphold the lower court ruling on qualified immunity grounds, arguing that the officer's actions did not violate any clearly established law so as to render the officers individually liable in a damages action. But the Biden administration, along with the courts that have extended the community caretaking exception, overlook a key component of the Fourth Amendment, the security clause. After all, the Fourth Amendment opens with this phrase, the right of the people to be secure. In an amicus brief, the Institute for Justice noted that to the founding generation, secure did not simply mean the right to be spared of an unreasonable search or seizure, but also involved harms attributable to the potential for unreasonable searches and seizures. Harms attributable to the potential for unreasonable searches and seizures. It's always got to be so wordy. Basically, you know, the potential for a cop to assert that it's reasonable to bust in and ransack your house. Expanding the community caretaking exception to allow warrantless entries into people's homes on a whim, argued the IJ brief, invokes the arbitrary looming threat of general writs that so incited the framers, and would undermine the right of the people to be secure in their homes. I mean, it sounds pretty open and shut, right? Yeah. The IJ brief further argued that extending the community caretaking exception to the home would flatly contradict the Supreme Court's prior rulings, which has only discussed community caretaking in the context of vehicle searches and seizures. In those cases, the animating purpose for the exception was to allow the officers to remove damaged or abandoned vehicles that pose a risk to public safety. By contrast, the IJ amicus asserted that justification is entirely absent when it comes to homes. The Fourth Amendment protects our right to be secure in our property, which means the right to be free from fear that the police will enter your house without warning or authorization, said Institute for Justice Joshua Wyndham. A rule that allows police to bust into your home without a warrant whenever they feel like they're acting as a community caretakers is a threat to everyone's security. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to go. That sounds like a mess. All right. I'm going to take a sip of this water. So authentic community response to mental health crisis. A recognition that it's a community problem in a more conservative way. Greater devotion to subsidizing mental health support, considering it is lowering the life expectancy in many places and isn't sufficiently considered in these social democracies as well. Because it almost seems like this is a physical outcome of certain economic maturity. Kerala in India, one of the two communist states, has the highest quality of life by human development indicators. It also has the highest suicide and alcoholism rates in India, quality of life in India. Yeah. Almost like, there's some material economic basis to these problems. I wonder if anybody wrote about this at some point in the past. All right. Photojournalist calls on Biden administration to lift media border ban. Says he was removed by law enforcement for photographing migrants. Fun. I'm assuming photos kind of like this. That's what's implied here, I guess. A photojournalist covering the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border has detailed the media blackout imposed on the area, which he says has included him being prevented from snapping images of struggling migrants. I respectfully ask the White House to stop the media border ban, Getty Images special correspondent John Moore tweeted on Thursday, accompanying his text with multiple photos he took of migrants near the southern border. Moore revealed that local law enforcement agents removed him from the area and prevented further pictures from being taken. According to Moore, the officers said they were doing so at the request of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Here's the tweet. I respectfully ask the White House to stop the media border ban. I took these photos of migrants walking up from the border. I was later removed by local law enforcement, saying they were under orders from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Is there a retweet button? No, there's no retweet button. There we go. In a follow-up tweet, Bork claimed most border areas near the Rio Grande are completely off-limits to media, and officials are making it particularly difficult to capture and release images from inside currently overrun detention facilities. The White House yesterday allowed one video camera into a sanitized detention facility, but no stills photographers, so no photographs. Meanwhile, most border areas near the Rio Grande are completely off-limits to media. I thought Biden was going to make it all better, guys. What happened? Wasn't Biden going to fix all this? I was told by all these lefty people on the internet that Biden was going to be the solution to this problem. God. In tweets earlier this week blasting the Biden administration's zero-access granted strategy with the media, Moore, an award-winning photojournalist who has covered the southern border for years, revealed the contrast in press freedom afforded by previous administrations to that allowed by the current one. So here's the real question, right? I have photographed CBP under Bush, Obama, and Trump, but now zero access is granted to media. I'm sorry, who's the lesser evil? Who is the lesser evil here? I mean, that was the argument, right? Didn't people say something about this? Weren't there people saying something like this might happen? I respectfully ask U.S. Customs and Border Protection to stop blocking media access to their border operations. I have photographed CBP under Bush, Obama, Trump, and now zero access is granted to media. These long lens images taken from the Mexican side. Yep. The issue of transparency at the border, which is seeing a dramatic increase in migrant crossings, especially by unaccompanied minors, has become an especially hot button in recent weeks, as reports detail an out-of-control system. These have included whistleblower images released by Project Veritas from a Texas detention facility that seems to show minors being required to sleep on the floor covered only by foil emergency blankets, with thin sheets of plastic separating them from each other for coronavirus purposes. The report also included allegations of physical abuse at the site, as well as migrants testing positive for COVID-19 based on information from an anonymous source. They are separated by age or physical size depending on room. 50 were COVID positive in these cells over the last few days. There have been multiple sexual assaults, normal assaults, and daily medical emergencies, they said. Here is one of those pictures. Why did Trump allow these photographs, etc.? It's a flex for rightists, and he gets pressed from the libs too. Wasn't his kids and Cage's stuff really bad for him? Only for, like, the liberals. The conservative voters thought it was cool. And yeah, only for a couple of years, and then people forgot. Yeah, because people were too busy concerned about Trump saying rude things on Twitter. I mean, you know, this stuff kept going on, and people weren't really paying it. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people weren't paying attention to it after a certain point. But yet, Trump's tweets are much more attention-grabbing. Well, I'm not going to read that post on the stream. Another article about Biden being held accountable for that stuff. Yeah. Biden administration officials have insisted for weeks that the border situation does not amount to a crisis, even as they scramble to find housing for thousands of unaccompanied minors, some of whom are now being sent to Texas military facilities. Vice President Kamala Harris has been put in charge of efforts to stabilize the border. The VP is set to implement a long-term strategy that gets the root causes of migration and getting at the root causes would be like stopping the destabilization of Latin America. That's the root cause. The root cause is capitalism and imperialism. Come on. And create strategic partnerships with countries such as El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala to address the issue at hand. President Joe Biden has blamed what he now describes as a surge at the border on the previous administration, though he has not directly addressed the issue of the lack of transparency subscribed to his administration compared to previous administrations. This new surge we're dealing with now started with the last administration, but it's our responsibility to deal with it humanely and to stop what's happening, Biden said at the White House this week. None of that really justifies turning away journalists. Like, yeah. All right. Well, yeah, they're trying to make it all go away, trying to make people stop paying attention to it because it's a Democrat. Obama broke records deporting people. And that's after Bush was seen as like the real big bad guy for deporting. And I mean, he was bad, but then Obama came and was worse. And nobody paid attention to, well, not nobody, but a lot of people who were complaining about Bush didn't complain about Obama. All right, Haiti, this is from The Guardian. Haiti deportation soars, Biden administration deploys Trump-era health order. There have been more Title 42 expulsions in the space of a few weeks than during an entire year of Trump's administration, report says. Here we go again. Easier for Democrats to do the kind of stuff that Republicans are known for, because people don't pay as much attention when Democrats do it. Julian Borger is the name of the author of this article. Nice. Is there something on here with, there's a burger emote on Twitch, right? There's gotta be. See if I can spam one of those. We need some of it. Let's have one in the side tube for Julian Borger in Washington. The Biden administration has so far deported more Haitians in a few weeks than the Trump administration did in a whole year, with the use of a highly controversial Trump-era public health order denying asylum seekers basic legal rights, according to a new report. The report, The Invisible Wall, published on Thursday by a coalition of immigrant rights groups, focuses on Title 42, part of the 1944 Public Health Service Act, invoked a year ago by the Trump administration as grounds for summary expulsion of migrants because of the supposed health risk they posed during the COVID pandemic. The Biden team has sought to place a moratorium on deportations of immigrants already in the country, though that moratorium has been blocked by a court order, but it has not stopped the Title 42 expulsions of newly arrived migrants. The report found the pace of deportation flights to Haiti, in particular, had increased dramatically. More Haitians have been removed to Haiti in the weeks since President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris took office than during all of fiscal year 2020, according to the Invisible Wall report published by the Haitian Bridge Alliance, the Quixote Center, and the Undocu Black Network. In part, at least, the rise in expulsions mirrors an increase in arrivals of Haitians at the border, misled by rumors and deliberate disinformation from people smugglers that the Biden administration had relaxed the regime at the border. And misinformation by certain online personalities who were also saying similar things. Most of the new arrivals have been waiting in Mexico for months, hoping for a change in the rules affecting Haitians. Some of the deportees may have been held in detention centers in the U.S. Yeah, Hillary did have some weird shit with Haiti. She specifically fought to stop them from raising the minimum wage, or maybe even lowered it. But that's the thing that was like news a couple years ago with Hillary Clinton and Haiti. Can't let those poor people in these foreign countries have a higher minimum wage. You got to keep them down. What gave Donald Trump his wall was Title 42. That has been incredibly more effective than any physical barrier, said Ruben Garcia, the director of Annunciation House, a migrant support group support center in El Paso, Texas. This was never about the pandemic to begin with. This was precisely about border enforcement. I think I might sneeze. Maybe not. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, pointed out that 94% of the Title 42 expulsions are migrants from Mexico and Northern Triangle countries of Central America, with Haitians accounting for less than 1%. Okay. Our immigration system was decimated over the last 4 years, and we are starting from square one to build an orderly system that treats people humanely and doing so in a way that protects public health in the midst of a deadly pandemic, the DHS said in a statement to The Guardian. The administration has been clear that the border remains closed, and we are urging people not to come. We are building the process that will allow them to make a claim for humanitarian relief without making the perilous journey to the border. It has ended Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, known formally as the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, which required asylum seekers to stay south of the border while their cases were processed. The change applies to Latin American migrants, but reports from the border suggest the Haitian asylum seekers in Mexico heard about the change and hoped it would make it easier for them to ask for asylum. The partial opening of the border had caused confusion and misinformation in Haitian communities stuck in Mexico under the Title 42 policy, the report said. Marginalized and isolated in Mexico by race, culture, and language, Haitian migrants generally do not understand that MPP does not apply to them. Often misled by misinformation within the community or false rumors from coyotes, smugglers, or guides, Haitian migrants optimistically hope with MPP they can now seek protection if they enter the United States outside a port of entry. The new administration has sought to combat those perceptions in the hope of forestalling a wave of new immigration from Haiti. On Wednesday, the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince put out a message from Biden in Creole on its Twitter account saying, When dis bien clair pavini, I could say quite clearly, don't come over. That sounds like really generic and kind of vague, like not really not a good articulation of policy. Not like borders closed or something like that. The report points out that the Title 42 policy was forced on a reluctant Centers for Disease Control and Prevention by the Trump White House, ordered by Vice President Mike Pence, and driven by the hardline anti-immigrant presidential advisor at the time, Stephen Miller. As the policy requires the deportees to be crammed together in detention centers and then deported on flights, the public health justification for Title 42 rings hollow, the report argues. Jeez. As ICE's detention system becomes a massive COVID-19 hotspot in 2020, removals posed a significant danger due to the potential spread of the virus both within immigration detention facilities and to receiving countries like Haiti, the Invisible Wall report states. Despite the danger, ICE failed to take adequate steps to prevent, treat, or test for COVID-19, it added. In June 2020, ICE reported that only 30% of detainees had been tested for COVID-19, and of those tested, about 30% tested positive for the virus. That's a very high infection rate. Furthermore, even refugees who had been in quarantine and tested negative for COVID have still been expelled on the same health pretext. Migrant advocacy groups argue Title 42 is a violation of U.S. obligations under international law to offer asylum seekers due process. Those expelled under the policy are routinely denied access to a lawyer or the opportunity to claim a credible fear of what would happen to them in Haiti. In theory, they can request a screening under the Convention Against Torture and make a credible fear claim to an immigration official, but unlike asylum seekers, they cannot have an attorney present or appeal against the decision of the official. The CAT screenings appear to be a mere formality, the report says. In conversations with multiple attorneys, no one had heard of a single person detained under Title 42 who had passed the CAT screening. Sounds like maybe the purpose of those screenings are not exactly what they're being stated as. Yeah, that's the end of that article. We're about halfway through, it looks like, 2 hours in. I'm going to take a short break. I'll be back in about 10, let's say 10 minutes. Yeah. So, anybody in the SciTube can queue up some short videos. Yeah, there you go. In the meantime, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Where's my... There we go. That's the BRB scene. I muted the mic. There we go. Reactive wash. I don't know about that. Maybe less reading out loud, more talking. Yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to balance with, like, I know it's a joke. I've been trying to figure out what the balance is between, like, commentary and just reading the articles. I think I might get better mileage out of, like, reading the first paragraph and maybe skimming for details before I just kind of riff on stuff. But a lot of these have, like, some really good details that I can expand on. Color commentary, yeah. I don't know. Maybe I should also restrict myself to, like, the first post that News Anon makes, or maybe do, like, the first post and then the op-ed ones. Maybe seeing if you can seek out someone for some of the topics each day. Well, yeah, that would be. I like the idea of having people post articles in the chat for me to read. Jimmy Dore's friend Ron Placone did, or maybe still does, a similar thing to that, where he has people tweet articles at him. That's like a crowdsourced news show. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's a good idea. See, it's just, let's see, here's how many articles are left from News Anon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the last 3 are op-eds. So, I think I'm going to try to blast through these and consider a format change. I'm probably going to take a break Friday just to, yeah, there was something. Actually, tell you what, I'll make sure I read this because it's funny. Yeah. This was the last post from the OP on the news thread. Plastics, other chemical pollutants are shrinking penis sizes and reducing fertility, imperiling human race, scientists claim. Or scientist one claims. We've known about, like, plastics and stuff being pollutants that have caused problems for a while now. I mean, maybe it's legit, maybe it's, what is it, General Ripper obsessing about poisoning our precious bodily fluids. This is an RT article if I've ever seen one, but believable. Yeah, I mean, you know, hormonal disruption is a thing that can happen from pollutants. So it's not that far-fetched. Exposure to plastics and other chemical hazards of modern life is reducing penis sizes and sperm counts, eroding fertility to the extent that the future of the human race is imperiled. Might be a little hyperbolic. A top epidemiologist claims in her new book. She's terrified. It's like Children of Men, except there's, like, the vanishing inches of dick. And she's, like, terrified. Simply put, we're living in an age of reproductive reckoning that is having reverberating effects across the planet. Dr. Shanna Swan wrote in her book, Countdown. Countdown. Yeah, like, dick size wouldn't actually reduce fertility. Sperm count is what would matter. But yeah, being insecure is, like, nobody's insecure about their sperm count, right? The dick size thing is what gets you attention. She added, the current state of reproductive affairs can't continue much longer without threatening human survival. I think this might be one of those things where you take, like, 2 data points and extrapolate from them, and it's like, oh, there was, like, a 25% drop over this period, and if that continues this way, then by 2050 nobody will have kids. Swan is a leading environmental and reproductive epidemiologist who has studied declining sperm counts and the impact of environmental chemicals and pharmaceuticals for more than 20 years. Her book, which was released in late February, is a top seller in several scientific categories. Well, that just means that it's good marketing. Top seller doesn't mean that it's more valid science. Come on. So much for a COVID baby boom, a big drop, and the number of kids being born shows what happens if you scare people about the future. I mean, like, yeah, people aren't having kids because times are tough, because it's like, yeah, no, obviously, that's different from, you know, fertility problems. Swan alleges that phthalates, which are used in plastics manufacturing, and other chemicals have led to such alarming effects as an increasing number of babies being born with small penises. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I'm pretty sure that any penis when you're born is going to be small. I'm pretty sure that it's like puberty when you actually get the normal sized one, right? Can you like actually tell when they're born? That sounds, she's an epidemiologist, right? Not an embryological development. Like this doesn't quite add up to me. Sharply lower testosterone levels in men, sperm counts in Western countries plunging 59% from 1973 to 2011, and a fertility decline of more than 50% of the past half century. Okay, I mean, like, yeah, but the thing is, there's a lot of things that have been happening in that time span, and whether it's specifically the phthalates or not, that's not probably entirely clear. However, the same stuff was used to find that smoking causes cancer, so, you know, it's not nonsense. It's just, it sounds a little alarmist for the evidence that they've got. But of course, like, obviously you don't want reproductive health to become non-viable. That's a bit of a long-term problem. Female reproductive development and estrogen levels also have been altered. In some parts of the world, the average 20-something today is less fertile than her grandmother was at 35. Yeah, but that's also a really long time, and probably a lot of things have changed besides specifically the phthalates. I mean, I could see how it affects people potentially, but I'm not seeing, they're not making that connection here. Reproductive havoc is affecting animals too, the scientists said, pointing to such findings as unusually small penises in alligators, panthers, and mink, as well as more fish, frogs, birds, and snapping turtles having ambiguous genitalia. Do the chemicals do the same thing across all those different species? That's, I mean, like, this is like a problem, but that's, I don't know, it seems like zeroing in too specifically on a particular substance. Maybe we'll have to evolve and learn how to use it better. Regardless of cause, isn't half sperm count absolutely nuts? Yes, but it is absolutely nuts. It's a big deal for fertility. The cause, that's something that you really need to look into. And I think this is something that's been like a very long-term trend as well. But there's all kinds of things that could play into this, not just like plastic. The phthalates are what's called a plasticizer. They make the plastics more supple, more flexible. So like if you think of a plastic PVC pipe that's used for water or something, if that didn't have a plasticizer in it to make it softer, it would be too brittle and would break all the time. But if you give it a plasticizer that makes it more bendy and give it some give, then it's a lot easier to work with, and you can, like, you know, stick the couplers onto it and be like pretty rough with it, and it doesn't break, and you don't have to worry so much about like damage to it. So that's what the phthalates are, and they're in like any kind of plastic basically. Like a lot of them that you have that are in contact with like food too, like bottles or cups for water, I would think. And of course pipes. But yeah, so that's potentially a cause, but there's all kinds of other stuff too. Like, you know, there's massive amounts of hormones that are excreted in human waste that end up in the environment, because of like the number of people that there are. So there's factors like that. There's who knows what other kind of things that we have that we're exposed to, you know, like Teflon and stuff in cookware. You might have some kind of stuff in your, that's like additives. Like there's so many things added to all products now that it's honest. If you sit back and like think about it and look at it, it's kind of terrifying. And then, yeah, there's drugs. There's like potential things with diet that could affect this stuff. Like there's so many factors that go into biology and development that it's kind of like throwing a dart and hoping that you're going to land on the right thing with this phthalate stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so falling fertility rates are predicted to have the populations in 23 countries, including Spain, Japan, and Italy by 2100, according to University of Washington study. And that's without accounting for, you know, economic problems, what do you call it, climate change, all kinds of other things that might impact population sizes. All the shit you mentioned is like a byproduct of crude oil. Yeah. Well, crude oil is used as like, oil is not just, you know, for powering things. You know, it's synthesized into all kinds of chemicals. That's not necessarily like crude oil is making everybody sick so much as crude oil is like the basis of so much of our manufacturing and chemicals. I had a biology professor who said man shouldn't store their phones in their pockets because of radiation. Yeah, that's actually something that Jill Stein got a whole bunch of flack for saying back 2016. She was you know, an advocate against like Wi-Fi potentially causing problems for sperm, which like is somewhat legitimate. It's not like ironclad, but there is evidence to suggest that that's a real problem, and that having like a laptop on your lap connected to Wi-Fi, basically Wi-Fi is like radio waves. And we know for sure that like at a radio station, if you have powerful enough radio waves, you know, that they can be picked up by radios miles away. If you get too close to that, that can really hurt you. So it's not really a stretch to think that cells that are as sensitive to the environment as sperm cells could be harmed by, you know, a much lighter version of those kind of that spectrum of radiation. You know, that's the thing about so much of the technology that we've got, is that it was implemented without any care for like health and environmental consequences, right? Yeah, and maybe it turns out too that it is just the phthalates specifically doing this. It could be. The global fertility rate is forecast to drop from 2.4 in 2017, just above the 2.1 level pegged by the UN as necessary to maintain current population levels, to 1.7 in 2100. Uh-oh. Oh, no. Let me see if... Hold on, let me turn off the browser just in case there's a problem with... Uh-oh. No, I don't want to remove the item. Oh, shit. Oh, I think I'm having hard drive problems again. I thought this was just an issue with certain programs, but my desktop got erased. Yeah. All the programs installed on that hard drive are fucked. I gotta reboot my computer a couple times to get them back. Yep, okay. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to stop the stream there since I can't access the web right now. gonna have to reboot my computer. Sorry to cut it short. At least we ended on an interesting story. But yeah, I don't know. I might not be able to get all the stuff back before it gets too late tonight. But if I do, I'll maybe hop on real quick. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. I'm probably going to take Friday off. I'm going to try to stream Saturday morning, and then Monday through Thursdays and Saturday mornings is tentatively the schedule from now on. Peace out. Thanks for showing up. Tip your waiters and wait.